Welcome back to the Simply Imperfect Podcast. On this episode, we're going to talk about...
It's Britney, bitch.
If you're not a millennial, you may not instantly know who that is, but that's Britney Spears. But if you're a millennial like me, you may have just felt that song in your soul. Okay, I can't even get all the way through that. I know it's pretty laughable, but I know for me at least, I grew up in a time with the boy bands and those pop queens, the NSYNCs, the Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Jessica Simpson, some like O-Town or some 98 Degrees. Throw me some LFO and it's like literally getting super nostalgic just even thinking about it right now. Somebody who's either older or younger than that generation is probably rolling their eyes at me. But it was our music, and it is still to this day like it just in my soul. Now the point of this episode is not to take a trip down memory lane, although the rabbit hole of nostalgia that I was in for some of what caused this to be this week's episode is what this is the point. So a week ago Sunday, there was a documentary that was on FX, and it was a documentary done by the New York Times about Britney Spears. And of course, my millennial self heard about this documentary and I had to watch it. The documentary was called Framing Britney Spears, and if you haven't watched it, I streamed it. It's pretty easy to find, but I would say go watch it if you have any interest in like pop culture from that era. And the idea behind this documentary is really covering the rise and fall and then rise again of Britney, and really talking about Britney Spears' conservatorship. And that fact the fact that Britney Spears still has a conservatorship probably surprises some people, because it's not something that a lot of people talk about. To be completely honest, I knew at one point she had a conservatorship, but I had totally forgotten that she even had one. So after watching the documentary, which I'll talk about in this episode, I also went down a little bit of a rabbit hole and looking at the information some of it I remember. I remember watching it as a young kid, looking at it with adult eyes. I honestly can't believe some of it. So I have a ridiculous amount of show notes that I compiled looking up all of the information for this episode, and like usual, I'll link it in the comments of the episode. But all of my show notes are at simplyimperfect.org. So let's kind of back up a little bit and do a little bit of an explanation of what a conservatorship is and a bit of a timeline. Starting with the definition so I don't get rolling in the timeline and forget to cover it. A conservatorship is a legal process in which somebody gains authority over someone else's person, estate, or even both. A lot of times these conservatorships are used to help somebody who is elderly, someone who doesn't have the mental capacity to make their own decisions or take care of themselves. It's used to protect somebody who doesn't have the ability or is at risk of somebody else taking advantage of them and their inability to make their own decisions. I'll put a link to the Black's Law Dictionary in the show notes. Black's Law is a commonly used legal definition dictionary, and you can take a look at the explanation yourself if you would like to. But Britney Spears was put into a conservatorship of both her person and her estate in 2008. And the crazy thing is, 2008 is only 10 years after the Baby One More Time music video was released. The Baby One More Time single for her Baby One More Time album, the single was released in 1998, the album released in 1999, which the amount of stuff that takes place in the 10 years from 1998 to 1999 is pretty crazy. I'll have a timeline that I've compiled in the show notes, but if you think about it, so Britney breaks into the pop scene in 1998. And if we're being honest, she was not a stranger to being in the public eye, because back in 1993, Britney was on the Mickey Mouse Club. And the crazy thing is, she was on the Mickey Mouse Club with Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, and even, I had forgotten about this, but she was on it with Ryan Gosling. After the Mickey Mouse Club ends, Britney talks about how she took a few years off. She went back. She got to have a few normal years in high school as just like a normal everyday kid. But then in 1998, Baby One More Time, the song was released, and Britney would have only have been 17 years old. She was born in December of 81. So now even thinking about it, since she's born in December, there's a possibility, depending on when in the year the single was released, that she was still 16 years old, which is really young to be just thrown into the public eye like she was, because that song was released and she was on to the races and everything. I mean, her career crazy took off. And these are the things that happened in the 10 years between the song release in 1998 and the temporary conservatorship being granted in 2008. So 1998 is when the single Baby One More Time was released. In 1999, the album was released and she went on tour with NSYNC. She also started dating Justin Timberlake. In 2000, another album, Oops, I Did It Again, was released. 2001, the iconic Slave for You performance with the big giant python on her shoulders. That's when that one happened. In 2002, all of our little teeny bopper hearts were broken because Justin and Britney broke up. But then this also shoved her into another media storm and the drama of when Justin Timberlake released Cry Me a River, and there were all these rumors about it being based off of Britney cheating. And so she was the center of attention there. 2003, another album, Toxic, is released. In 2003, it's also the year that Britney and Madonna kiss at the MTV Music Awards, which was a firestorm again. Can you imagine being Christina Aguilera? Because when people talk about that night, they talk about Britney and Madonna, but Madonna also kissed Christina Aguilera. But no one talks about it. I wonder why the difference. So now we're getting into the 4 years prior to 2008, where things really get moving in Britney's life, and there's a lot of things that happen. So from 2004 to 2008, there is an event, a big event every year. So in 2004, she marries Kevin Federline. 2005, she has her first son, and in 2006, she has her second son, and by 2007, she's divorced. So she is married, divorced, and has 2 children. And her children are super close in age. I believe they're actually even less than a year apart. So you have all of that going on. And then the divorce, there's a lot of custody issues. There's a lot of drama going on there. So in the same year as the divorce, it's also the same year that she is seen shaving her hair off. It's the same year that she is seen attacking a paparazzi's car with an umbrella. She loses physical custody of her children in 2007. Then in 2008, she actually loses visitation. Visitation is later in the same year returned to her. But then in 2008 as well, she has a 5150, which I'll leave an explanation of a 5150 in the show notes. But a 5150 is a California way of referring to a 72-hour hold on somebody. So she was placed on a 72-hour mental health hold. And the thing is, all of this is happening and Britney is right in the public eye. There are photos and video of her being taken by ambulance from her house to this 5150 hold. So even when she is at absolute rock bottom, she can't get away from the paparazzi's eye. Could you imagine going through the worst moments of your life and having the paparazzi right in your freaking face? I I can't imagine that. So then in 2008, after all of this, and I mean, it's not too far of a jump to say whatever was going on, and I'm not going to make any mental health assumptions or guesses or any of that kind of thing, but it isn't far of a stretch to see whatever she had going on here is probably what allowed the temporary conservatorship to be put into place. And yes, I said temporary. It was a temporary conservatorship that keeps being continued. Okay, so now that you have a little bit of a timeline of everything that was going on leading up to the conservatorship, let's talk a little bit about the documentary Framing Britney. So it's my understanding that there has been a bit of a movement, whether it is the Free Britney movement dating all the way back to when it started, or if the Free Britney movement is just something recently. But it's my understanding that there has been a bit of fan dissatisfaction with the fact that Britney is still under a conservatorship for probably the entirety of the conservatorship. A lot of people believe that there was a time at which Britney was probably not in the best headspace, but that a conservatorship wasn't necessarily appropriate. Now, to understand a conservatorship, you also have to understand that it is a legal process in which a judge takes into consideration all sides presented to them. There will be medical evaluations done. It's not something that just happens. A judge oversees everything and makes sure it's appropriate and that the person truly needs to be in a conservatorship. It's not something that's just willy-nilly done. But the hard part, and I think a part of what creates a bit of the controversy, is a lot of it is under seal. Like, we don't get to see what medical evaluations were done to prove to a judge that Britney needed a conservator, somebody else to make decisions over her person and her finances. Which, don't get me wrong, it is 100% appropriate. Britney doesn't need her medical records, even though some have been leaked, which is awful. Nobody needs their medical records out there in the public eye for us to scrutinize and be like, yep, she's crazy. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not appropriate. However, veils of secrecy always creates some kind of conspiracy theory, whether the theory is right or wrong. So there's a couple things with the Free Britney movement that have allowed it to take on traction. One is people believe that somebody who has been such a productive member of society as Britney's been in many of the years following the conservatorship being put into place, that somebody who has those abilities doesn't need somebody making their decisions for them. Because here's the thing, with the type of conservatorship Britney has, she can't do things like vote, drive, decide to have more children, decide to get married, talk about the conservatorship, use the internet freely, use social media freely. She can't give interviews that aren't scripted and then approved of by the conservatorship. Which means Britney couldn't get into her car and go down to the local Target for some shopping therapy to grab some new nail polish or to buy a bag of M&Ms because she wanted chocolate. There are very simple things in Britney's life that she's not able to do, and yet she can do a 4-year Vegas residency, which, if you guys have watched any of the clips from those performances, they weren't easy, and you can't tell me it wasn't grueling. And how can somebody who apparently doesn't have the mental capacity or ability to make her own decisions perform hundreds of times in Vegas over a 4-year period? So this fact has caused a lot of people to question the validity of whether a conservatorship is appropriate. They also question the ability, because a conservator has the ability to sign Britney into contracts that would make her work whether she wanted to or not. She no longer gets to make decisions on what she does work-wise. So being completely honest, there's a chance that Britney had no interest in doing the Vegas residency at all or for the amount that she did. But if the conservator signed the contract, she would have to do it. And the thing is, depending on when the conservatorship was placed in 2008, Britney has had as many as 4 albums come out post placing of the conservatorship. She has also had a 4-year Vegas residency. This is somebody who has been working pretty much nonstop until 2019. So for 11 years after the conservatorship, she has continued to work. But yet, none of those decisions technically are hers, which is just astounding. It's astounding to think about. The other thing that people have called into question about the conservatorship is the fact that the person that is placed in charge of the conservatorship initially, it's changed in the recent months, but originally was her father. So this is something that's talked about in the documentary, is not only do people wonder if a full-blown conservatorship was appropriate, they also question the fact that Jamie Spears, her father, is the one that's in charge of it, because it is said throughout the documentary that her dad wasn't around a whole lot, that he wasn't somebody who played an active role in Britney's life. And they all talk about sometimes it was because he was at home. Like there was a time period where Brittany and her mom were in New York while Britney was getting training. I believe she did an off-Broadway performance. She was in New York working, and her father was back home with her younger sister, Jamie Lynn, and was also working to help provide for the family. So whether he was working or there were some times where he was away from the family kind of fighting his own demons, but for whatever reason, whether fighting his own demons or providing for the family or anything in between, he wasn't around a whole lot. So there were people who were interviewed that were like, whether the conservatorship was appropriate or not, setting that aside, there were a lot of people that didn't believe her dad was the appropriate person. And there are a lot of people who, on top of that, the fact that Britney's dad can actually obtain an income by being the conservator, he can obtain a % of her income because he is managing everything. And Britney has made a lot of money. So even a small %, he allegedly is obtaining a significant amount of income by having her in a conservatorship. So the argument is he is personally benefiting from having control of his daughter and her estate. Now, opinions of Jamie aside, I am going to say I can't imagine watching your child go through some of the things Britney was going through during these times. It has to be extremely difficult to watch your child constantly be scrutinized. Like everything she did was in the media. Was she being too sexy? Should she not do that? I mean, everything was critiqued down to when her and Justin broke up. One of the things that Britney was constantly asked leading up to this, and this is something they show in the documentary, is a lot of the questions that she was asked by reporters. And the fact that reporters constantly felt it was okay to ask her things like, are you a virgin? Like, have you had sex? And her answer for a very, very long time was, yes, I'm still a virgin. I want to wait and save that for the right person. Well, as soon as Britney and Justin broke up, what were people doing? Well, they were asking Justin if they had sex, if they had slept together, and they were celebrating him in his comment, which if you listen to the audio of that specific radio interview, he jokingly says yes, like, doesn't make you happy if I say yes kind of thing, and people ran with it. And while slut-shaming Britney about how she was way too sexual, I mean, a the wife of I believe it was a governor of a state, his wife was saying that Britney was making it hard to raise children in today's day and age with how sexy she was. And if she had the opportunity to shoot her, she would. Well, let's be honest here. I'm sure there's a lot of parents who would say they'd rather raise their children with Britney Spears' influences than the current influences that the music industry has today. However, aside from that, saying that you want to shoot somebody because of the music they produce is wrong. But why was it constantly... I can't imagine how difficult it was to watch your child be in the public eye, constantly criticized everything she did, and then watch her go through these big personal life events. I mean, just down to having 2 children in less than 2 years, in a year. I mean, they were less than a year apart. The amount of strain that puts on your body, both physically and mentally, and everything else that just builds to this big combustion in 2008, I can't blame a parent wanting to do absolutely anything that they could do to help protect them. And Britney Spears' mom even talks a little bit about this time and about the time that she was put on the conservatorship. She talks about specifically a gentleman named Sam Lufty, and it's somebody they talk about in the documentary a bit, that this gentleman came into her life at a time where Britney was most vulnerable, and really kind of preyed on Britney. And so you have these parents who are watching their child spiral a bit because of everything going on in her life. And then on top of that, they have somebody come in, and in their opinion, he was preying on their daughter. And there's a lot of articles where you can see that there's a lot of the spiraling that Britney did, that they actually place the blame on the Sam gentleman. In Lynn's book, Britney's Mom, she actually talks about how, and this is a direct quote, within a month or so of meeting, Sam was in complete control of Britney's life, labeling himself as her friend, her manager, her life coach. Everyone deferred to him. Britney's business manager, her record company, her lawyers, they had no choice. He had appointed himself as her gatekeeper, and there was no one he wanted to keep the gate closed to more than Britney's family. You know, in my opinion, you can totally see, if you lay everything out in front of you, why a family would feel like they had to do something. And this conservatorship, if you look at the big picture, could possibly seem like the best answer and something that they could do to not control, but help their daughter succeed and live her best life. And there are many people who have been close to the situation who have said to news outlets that even though she isn't the one making the decisions, she is actively involved in making the decisions, which if true, if she is actively involved in the decision-making process regarding her personal life and her career, it would totally defeat the Free Britney movement's argument that she's being held against her will and controlled, and she doesn't get to be involved in anything. So another critique of the Free Britney movement is Britney's voice. Yep, her voice. They talk about how Britney's voice changed over time, and I will link in the show notes a video that I watched on YouTube by I don't know if she's a vocal coach or exactly what she was, but she reviews Britney, going all the way back to her on Star Search and Mickey Mouse Club and some of her original music and how her voice changed. And the argument is something to the effect of Britney was forced to sing a certain way, to fall into a certain space. Some of the argument is because they were pitting her against people like Christina Aguilera and Jessica Simpson. They were trying to make her voice be very stand out, like not sound exactly the same as everybody else that was coming onto the market at the exact same time. And so over the years, the conservatorship has changed and evolved. And so the Free Britney movement obviously has changed and evolved at the same time. And in the last year, some of the way the conservatorship has been set up has changed as well. At the end of 2019, Britney's dad actually steps down as the conservator of Britney's person, and somebody else steps in. At the time, it was said that the reason Britney's dad stepped down was because of some medical issues. But since then, we've also seen that there was some kind of incident during this time that caused Britney's ex-husband, Kevin, to obtain a restraining order protecting the two young children from her father, which, as you can imagine, the person who is your conservator that's in charge of you as a person, there could be some conflicts if your conservator can't be around your children. And I would assume it would make it difficult for Britney to be around her children as well. So that change has been made. Now, in recent months, there have been movements in the conservatorship to remove Britney's dad from conservator of her estate as well. There are some questions being put into effect about his management of her money. And the Free Britney movement has actually played a part in this a bit because Britney's had a manager who resigned from the position, and I will link some YouTube videos in the show notes by Emily D. Baker, who is a legal analyst who breaks down a lot of the legal documents connected to the conservatorship. But in those documents, you can see where they talk about how Britney's manager pretty suddenly steps down because of some death threats and some pretty awful things that were said to her because of her role in managing Britney and the Free Britney movement and this belief that Britney is being held against her will. Which, because a manager had stepped down, her dad had to set up a new manager, and they're alleging that Britney didn't get to be involved in this at all. There's also a question about the accounting of the conservatorship and some payments that Britney's dad has made that seem to be quite excessive, or paying for things that it doesn't seem that Britney's estate should be paying for. This stuff is a bit over my head, so like I said, I will link Emily D. Baker's. She's got a podcast called The Emily Show, but she's also got a YouTube channel where she shows you the documents and she breaks it all down. I will leave it to her to explain, so if you want to dive into that a bit more, head on over to her show. But basically what they're saying is they don't believe that her dad is making the appropriate decisions and that he is the appropriate person to be head of the conservatorship of Britney's estate. Which, if you look at a lot of the arguments in the Free Britney movement and any of the arguments against the conservatorship, a lot of the issues are stemming with Britney's dad, and they just don't feel like he's appropriate. And a lot of people use the example of the restraining order to be like, see, she doesn't have Britney's best interests, or he doesn't have Britney's best interests at heart. I don't know if any of that is true. It's just the ammo that is used against him. And if you actually look at a lot of the legal documents that Britney has filed, she's not asking for the conservatorship to be removed completely. What she is asking for is for her dad to be removed. And as of right now, Britney's dad is a co-conservator. The court has appointed a business who their job is to manage the finances in situations like this. And so I think if you look at what is being asked of the court, the goal of Britney's representation is to have her dad removed completely and have a business in place, a professional put in place that this is what they do. And, you know, at the end of the day, if Britney finds some kind of situation that she is comfortable with, that feels like is after her best interests, that allows her to have some freedom, maybe they can find a happy place. Because it seems to me, if you look at those closest to her, specifically her family, her brother talks about how I'll link an article where he talks about not being sure that not having any kind of conservatorship in place is a good idea. Her mom talks about how at the beginning the conservatorship was appropriate, and I don't know if, for me personally, if it was my sister who went through something very difficult and we felt a conservatorship was appropriate, I don't know if personally I could ever feel like just like letting them have free reign again wouldn't potentially end in the exact same thing that started the conservatorship. I could understand it being scary for it to be completely gone. I'm sure it feels like a bit of a safety net for them in case something goes off the rails again. But I also do feel that Brittany has shown over the years that she has some capabilities to be a productive member of society, that she should be allowed to have some kind of freedoms. And so I think what you have now is a power struggle to find the right dynamic, and hopefully you now have people who are truly advocating for what is in Britney's best interest. Somebody who is a neutral third party that doesn't necessarily have their neck in the game, where you could make the argument that her dad may not have the best interest at heart. I'm not saying he does. I think that some people have just been able to make the argument. I think when it comes down to it, the entire Free Britney movement comes down to the lack of information. And the thing is, there is information out there that we will just never have. We will never have, nor should we have, Britney's medical records or the evaluations of why they felt it was appropriate to place her in this conservatorship, why they felt she was at risk and didn't have the ability to make these decisions herself, and that she needed some help. And I think the argument can be made that she is doing so well today because of the conservatorship. I think it's another one of those situations where someone is in the public eye and we have just enough information to feel like we can make a judgment call. But in reality, we have no idea what's going on behind closed doors, and whether the Free Britney movement is based in even a little bit of truth, we just don't have it all. And while we can sit back and watch, I think for the most part, all we can do is hope that there are people close to Brittany that are fighting for what is best for her. And as a consumer and fans, we just sit back and support her as a person. What do you guys think? Do you guys feel that there was some shadiness going on with the conservatorship? Do you feel that right now she is being held against her will? And what about her voice? Do you guys feel like over the years that she has sung and spoke in what is her natural voice? I think, unfortunately, while you're looking at the information, there is a bit that is just always going to leave you with more questions and very few answers.